There are three things that are going on now to great extremes that have not existed since the 1930 to 45 period. And it's important to know those three things and then to understand them well. The first is what is going on with money and credit when you get to something like a zero interest rate and you need buying power. The government needs buying power, but they can't tax it. So what we have is the production of a lot of debt that the central bank prints money and buys that debt to spend. And the last time that happened, in the last few years, it happened starting in 2008, interest rates hit zero. They couldn't lower their interest rates. So they had to print a lot of debt and the government went in and bought it. Okay. And we're coming to the end of a debt cycle. So this is a big thing, because where does the money come from and who will get what? The government will now determine that, and then they'll print it and it'll devalue money. Okay, and how money flows, a big deal. So that's number one. The second one are wealth and political gaps that are causing great conflicts. Throughout history, there's always been the main things that everybody's always fought over is money and power, particularly political power. So what we have is a situation when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, particularly if you put a lot of debt having at the same time, you have a fight. I mean, that's been true through history. And it's reflected in the political gap. So the political gap it's classic political gap. Left, right, capitalist, socialist. Well, how do you distribute it? How are you going to deal with that? That becomes the other. And how you fight. So that's the second of the two, this wealth political gap that's causing the conflict. And it's coming at a time where we don't have much money because we don't have a good financial position. We're printing and putting it out with made up money. Meaning what happened, like COVID was such a good example. A lot of people and companies had falls in their income that would be ruinous. If checks didn't go out, we would have had a revolution. And so those checks and how do you save everything and so on? Okay, and it's not like the government had real money. So they made more debt and then the Federal Reserve printed it, the checks went out, which diminishes the value of money and so on and changes things. So then the third thing is the rise of a great power to challenge an existing great power. So the rise of China to challenge the United States. In all history, there are world orders. What that means are the dominant power. It's like in nature almost, the big bull or something. Anyway, there's the dominant power. And then what happens is in 1945, we entered the American world order. The United States won the war. And then in 1945, the winners of the world carved up the world. We had 80% of what was considered money at the time, gold, 80% of the world's money, essentially. We counted for half the world's economy, and the rules were set in the United States, basically. That's why the United Nations is in New York, the World Bank and the IMF are in Washington, D.C., because we began the American century. And then we are now at a time, we've never had another power challenge us in the same way. There was the Soviet Union, but they were always a fraction of the size economically, so couldn't compete on that same basis. They had nuclear weapons, but they didn't have the economic power and so on. But now we're dealing with China coming on as a power. I spent a lot of time in China over the last 36 years, by the way, and I admire how they're doing a lot of things. I mean, I know it's controversial to say that, but in terms of they're a power. Whoa, since I started going there, their average income has increased by 30 times. So they're a comparable power and they're also growing faster. And so that has an effect. So those three things are things that never happened in my lifetime before, but happened before in history, which led me to do the studies of what happened in history and the lessons I could gain. It affects everybody, it affects we know, let's start with ourselves. Most importantly, forget about the outside thing. Can we be healthy and strong? And what do we need to do? To know you have to be in it together. If we can row in the same direction, okay, if we can have thoughtful disagreement and get past that, if we can be in it together, like the wealthy and the poor, It sounds so difficult. But at the same time, if you read history and you see what happens when it's not, when you have a civil war, like we could be on the brink of a civil war. That sounds so crazy. But the truth is, in most countries, almost every century, there was a civil war or a revolution, some form of civil war or revolution. So it's almost inevitable that we're going to have something, okay? You either resolve it or you start fighting so badly that you really, once you cross a certain line, there's no coming back, because you do the damage, you demonize, and that person's such an enemy, or that class of people is such an enemy that the communication's gone and the fight. Well, you see this in politics today. In other words, is there a respect for the system and a mutual respect of trying to resolve these types of things? Or will they go to any lengths to win? Because a constitution or law will only carry you to so far, okay? There has to be an element of respect for it, right? If you think about, I want to distinguish, there's big differences in opportunities. So let's say, supposing you have two people of comparable opportunities, the marshmallow test is you take a kid and you say, okay, you can have one marshmallow now, or you could have two marshmallows in 15 minutes if you don't eat the first one. Once you start to realize that deferred gratification is going to make you better and so on, and you start to count how many days, weeks, months, or years can I live if I don't have money come in? And you start to focus in on that. That's the first step, okay? Like the marshmallow test. So I want to save. You got to start there. Then if you do that, you're necessarily going to go save in what? And then you'll start to get exposure how these things are different. Okay, then you start to care. Well, I'm going to have one of these and one of those, and you start to experience, and then you start to learn. And basically, that's what makes the difference. When it comes to the money, now at that moment that you don't want it, you have savings. That means I want savings. So the next thing inevitably that's going to come at you is, where do I put it? And then you get your choices, and then you experience it and you learn. I think first, calculate how many days, weeks, months, or years you can live on your saving. Because when you do that, you'll gain security. So look at how much you're spending and then say, how much do I need? And whatever that number is, you're going to need more than that, because it may go down rather than go up. So now, do I have a year's spending? I think you start there. Then you start to think, what are the things that are most important for me? And then you start with your business or your residence that have a symbiotic relationship and that you know well. If you start with your business, okay, you're closer to that, investing in yourself, whatever that may end up being, that may be your best investment. But if you're in a job, that's not the thing, because you're in a different position. And then I really think there's something good about your home, a basic thing about your home, because it's nice forced savings. And it also means that you fix it up, you're saving, you find out there's, oh, well, if I add this thing or that thing, and you're enjoying it. So when you're enjoying it and you're controlling it and it's yours and so on, that's pretty good. You know, if they keep mortgage tax deductions and so on, you know, there might be some benefits to it also, okay? But that's not a black and white answer. You know, so you could take a sharp pencil and say, is it better to rent or buy? Okay, that's a different question. But by and large, am I going to move? You know, all of those other questions. So when you start with, okay, what is it that's close to home and how much? You need a certain amount that's liquid. In other words, you got it in your house, you got to make a mortgage payment or something, and all of a sudden, you know, it's not liquid and you lose your job. Well, that can cause you trouble. So how much do I have that's liquid? How much do I have that's not liquid? Okay, and you start to get those things right. Pretty soon, you're getting yourself in good shape. And then you're also having some experiences, and then you go beyond that. So you start to, okay, what's a stock? What's a bond? And then, you know, you learn through experiences. I learned through my experiences. I started when I was a kid, 12. I used to caddy. and I took my caddying money and I put it in the stock market. And I was lucky. What happened to me, by the way, is I took my caddying money and I bought the only company that I ever heard of that was selling for less than $5 a share. And I was really dumb. I thought I'll buy more shares, so if it goes up, I'll make more money. And it was the only company. It was a company that was about to go broke, but some other company acquired it and it tripled. And I thought, this is an easy game. And I like it, easy money. But you experiment and you learn. You earn $100 and you spend $105, that's misery. If you earn $100 and you spend $95, you'll have a good life. Basically, I know so many people who don't earn much, but are there. Because if you start to think about what it is that it costs you to live in terms of, let's say, the basics, give me a sleeping, give me the food, let me be educated, and so on and so forth. I think most people can get themselves in a position where they're net positive. So if you can be net positive and you could do that, that's number one. Then I guess it was the list that we went to. The second is, what do you do next in terms of what do you need? What do you invest in? And then avoid the following mistake, the most common mistake of investing, thinking that the investment that did good is a good investment. People rather more expensive. The things quite often, those markets that did really, really well became more expensive, and everybody, smart money is all the time comparing them and competing. So what happens is the naive money buys the thing that was hot or is hot. The thing that has been terrible, which might be the thing that's beaten down. So I would say also an important element, diversify. Because what I learned about this is that, first of all investments compete. And it's not easy to tell whether one investment is better than the other, because if people could do that, life would be easy and everybody would make a ton of money. And this is a competitive game that's very difficult to compete in. So it's very difficult to say which one's better or worse. You could take experts and do all sorts of tests, and you'll find out that they can pick that, and you can't tell whether the worst ones are going to be better. So because of that, you understand that even picking the best ones is difficult, and particularly if you're naive. Like, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year on research to try to give us an edge. Wow. Okay. Now you've got to compete with us. So competing in the markets is more difficult than competing in the Olympics, but there are more people who try harder in order to do that. So it's a zero-sum game, but diversification will reduce your risk without reducing your return.